Joining us now to discuss the agenda they'll pursue on both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue is House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy. Congressman, President-elect Trump talked this week about possibly amending Obamacare instead of repeal and replace. Is amending good enough?
What he really talked about was keeping pre-existing conditions and staying on your parents' health care plan to 26. Those are actually Republicans' ideas, and those are in the health care replacement plan that Republicans have in a better way. So we will repeal and replace Obamacare. Obamacare is failing. Premiums up 25%. 16 of the 23 co-ops have failed or on the verge of it. Plans are pulling out. Less choice for the public. It has to change.
But you can't really legally repeal Obamacare unless you have a supermajority in the Senate to beat back a buster. So, one, won't some parts of Obamacare, the law parts, remain in place as opposed to the budget parts? And what do you do for those 20 million people who now have health insurance under Obamacare while you're dismantling the plan?
Look, we put a lot of thought into this, and we've worked hard to repeal it in the past. We know there's also a reconciliation, as you know, Chris, that's maybe a little inside Washington, allows with 51 votes to be able to do something in the Senate. In the House, we could move forward. But you want to have a transition. You want to make sure people are protected as they move, that they're able to continue to have coverage, and we're going to be able to do that. But you've got to stop this one-size-fits-all. You've got to empower the states. You've got to have more options. You've got to repeal that tax on medical device, on individual business, employer mandate. You know, there's 10,000 diseases, and we only have 500 cures. America should be a leader in healthcare and not have this continual rise in the premium price to Americans across this country.
Congressman, there were some big differences between Mr. Trump and congressional Republican leaders during the campaign. But House Speaker Paul Ryan talked about the new Republican government in Washington this week, and he sounded pretty exciting. Here he is.
With a unified Republican government, we can actually get things done for the people of this country. We now have that, and now we're working on putting the transition plans together to make sure that we can deliver that.
Congressman, what do you think you can get done, especially in the next 6 months, and what comes first?
Well, you know, it's not even a week since Tuesday's victory, but I see Republicans all working close together. I've talked to President-elect Donald Trump a couple times. I just spoke to Vice President Mike Pence just yesterday on the transition. How do we move forward? We're going to deal with health care. We're going to deal with economic job growth. That means tax reform. That means regulation. This administration has proposed more than 500 major rulings. A major ruling costs more than $100 million out there. So we've got to roll a lot of those back, get this economy moving again. Infrastructure. There are so many places that we can come together, even bipartisan, to get this country working again. You know, one thing that President-elect Donald Trump did, he listened to the forgotten voices, and he became their voice. Washington will change. And, Chris, I tell you this, on day one, we're not waiting to the inaugural. That first week of January, when this House is sworn in, we will get to work that day, because there is a lot to do, and we cannot waste time.
All right, let's go through a lightning round. Quick questions, quick answers on some of the ideas that Donald Trump laid out during the campaign, and you tell me how practical they are and how quickly you can do them. 1, build a wall on our southern border.
Well, I think, number one, yes, you do have to secure the southern border. You have to put a wall. You could be all virtual with the UAV airplanes as well, but I think that is very doable and one of the first things that needs to be done.
Now, that's interesting because Paul Ryan kind of fudged on that, too, this week. You're not committed to a brick-and-mortar wall along the border for the entire length.
Well, no, I believe you have to have a security all the way through, but when you look at the border, and this is something that the House knows a great deal about because we've actually worked on this and passed it through committee. When you look at a wall, but you also have the technology today with UAVs, you can look out 40 miles ahead. The terrain is different, so you can't always build in just a specific place, but you can protect it. The number one thing we need to do is protect our border.
Okay, I want to remind you we're on lightning round rules here, so we got to have quick questions. Quick answers. Deportation, okay. Mass deportation. Speaker Ryan has had problems with that.
Well, I think it's difficult to do. First thing you have to do is secure the border, and then we'll have the discussions as we move forward.
10-year infrastructure plan. Isn't that, and Trump is talking about 10 years, $500 billion. Isn't that the kind of stimulus package that you opposed under President Obama?
Obama never had infrastructure in his stimulus.
Well, there were shovel-ready projects. You just called it something different.
They were never ready. Look, we passed a long-term bipartisan highway bill, which hadn't been done in more than a decade. It's smart to plan a long-term one. America needs to focus on their infrastructure. It makes us more effective and more efficient. I think there's a place we could find common ground with Republicans and Democrats.
Are you ready to renegotiate trade deals, even if that risks getting into trade wars?
Look. Good trade deals are good for America. We want manufacturing jobs. I know the Canadian ambassador said he's willing to talk about it. But one thing we need, when you have 95% of people living outside of this country and we produce more than we could actually sell with inside, we need good trade deals. And that's what President-elect Donald Trump is for, a good deal.
What about Trump's plan, as he puts it, to drain the swamp in Washington? Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell has already said that term limits, which is one of Trump's ideas, are going nowhere.
Well, I think what Washington needs to do is wake up to what happened in this election. This was a big election. Washington has to change. That we need to make the public understand that this is their government, that we work for them, that we serve them. That's why you'll find on day one.
Yeah, but are there going to be structural changes, Congressman, like limits?
Well, term limits is something that could be brought up and voted on. I know the Supreme Court kicked it out, said it was unconstitutional, but if it could be voted on and passed, it's a way. I've watched states do it. Some it failed at and some it worked at. I think the most important term limit you have is at the ballot box, and we've got to show that we can actually work and solve the problem.
Some of your committee chairs are still talking about investigating Hillary Clinton. Here is Congressman Jason Chaffetz, who's the chair of the House Committee on Oversight.
There's still a lot of questions, and no matter who wins or loses this election come Tuesday, Congress is still going to look into it.
Now that Hillary Clinton's been defeated, is that really what you want to spend time on when you have a governing majority investigating Hillary Clinton?
Look, I'm the majority leader. I set the agenda. The agenda is going to be about job creation. It's going to be about reforming and repealing Obamacare. It's going to be about infrastructure. That's the focus that this election was about. President-elect Donald Trump has a vigorous agenda.
Wait, I got that. Congressman, what about investigating Hillary Clinton? Is that part of your agenda as the majority leader?
I leave that portion to law enforcement. It's just the way to do it. Keep politics out of it. Let's create jobs in this country. That's our agenda.
Finally, what's your sense of Donald Trump? Do you expect him to lay out broad principles and leave the details of legislation to Congress?
Well, I've dealt with Donald Trump quite a bit. I've talked to him a lot. The one thing I found in his business world, he was successful. He finds the very best people, gives them some freedom, lays out the guidelines, and he has high expectations and holds people accountable. Just look at the ice skating rink in Central Park. He was able to do something that government was not able to do. Make it under budget and make job done on time, just like he did with his recent hotel in Washington, D.C. I think he'll expect that of government, and it'll be a change, and it will be an exciting change.
But briefly, do you expect him to just lay out principles and then leave the legislating to members of Congress?
I think what he'll do, he'll lay out the principles, he'll hold us accountable. This is the key part of, which I think is one of his secret weapons, Vice President-elect Mike Pence has a clear understanding of how government works, being a governor, but also, more importantly, having served in Congress. He'll be able to work together to make sure we're held accountable to get the job done.
Congressman McCarthy, thank you. Thanks for talking with us today, and we'll be following all of this. Should be an exciting at least 100 days, and I would think 6 months, maybe even 4 years. Thank you, sir.